1. The dreamlike suburb of Green Pines Estate. Green Pines Estate sits about 45 miles west of downtown Dallas, Texas. A sprawling, meticulously planned oasis envisioned and built for the upper crust of American society. The neighborhood's very name conjures an aura of exclusivity. Winding private drives are lined with ancient pines and perfectly manicured lawns that roll gently between estates designed by renowned architects. Each home is a statement piece, stately modern mansions that blend glass, stone, and wood in seamless harmony. To someone unfamiliar, Green Pines might be mistaken for the set of a Hollywood film. Oversized fountains greet you at the main gate, while meticulously trimmed hedges spell out the community's monogram. At sunrise, mist drifts lazily across the private lake at its center. Joggers and cyclists enjoy peaceful trails that snake around the water, their path shaded by a canopy of old trees. Children's laughter and the distant hum of lawnmowers are the only interruptions to an almost unnatural calm. But the real cornerstone of Green Pines' allure is its security. Massive stone walls and iron gates encircle the entire suburb, monitored 24/7 by uniformed guards and a sophisticated network of security cameras. Entry is strictly regulated. Visitors must pass background checks, and a well-trained monitoring team surveys every vehicle and individual who approaches. The security presence is comforting rather than oppressive, a visible promise that for the privileged few who live here, danger and disorder exist only outside the gates. Life inside Green Pines is a curated experience. Residents have access to world-class amenities, a members-only country club with a championship golf course, tennis courts, a spa, and a gourmet restaurant led by a Michelin-starred chef. There are private schools, wellness clinics, boutiques, and art galleries, all within walking distance. Events such as wine tastings, charity galas, and garden parties are weekly norms, reinforcing a tight-knit, almost insular community culture. No expense is spared, the residents expect, indeed demand perfection, and the estate's management delivers it. The demographic makeup of Green Pines reflects America's wealthy elite: CEOs, tech moguls, partners at top law firms, celebrities, and influential politicians. Many residents deliberately sought Green Pines to escape the unpredictability and perceived chaos of city life. Here, they found a sanctuary for their families, a place where children ride their bikes without fear, where neighbors smile and wave, where the outside world, and its dangers, are kept squarely at bay. It's little wonder that most believed their neighborhood to be the safest, most desirable in all of Texas, or even the country. But as the residents of Green Pines would soon discover, the cocoon of privilege and safety does not render one immune from disaster. Beneath the surface perfection and guarded walls, human frailty and tragedy can still find a way inside. 1. The Lewis family, a portrait of American achievement. The Lewis family stood as a gleaming example of the American dream realized within Green Pines Estate, their name synonymous with accomplishment, respect, and the kind of quiet power earned over generations. At the head of the household was John Lewis, a real estate magnate who had steadily climbed from modest Midwestern origins to become one of Texas's most influential property developers. John emanated confidence. He possessed a resolute handshake, a natural ease in high society functions, and the keen ability to read a room. His portfolio dotted the Dallas skyline, his reputation built on both sound business strategy and an almost old-fashioned sense of community responsibility. John was often featured on local business journals, celebrated for generous donations to public causes and his commitment to urban revitalization. His wife, Diana Lewis, brought her own formidable strengths to the family. Born to Turkish immigrants in New York City, Diana was an Ivy League graduate and a tireless, high-profile attorney specializing in civil rights. Her reputation preceded her at every social gathering. Friends and rivals alike admired her sharp mind, unwavering principles, and a charismatic presence that drew people into impromptu debates on current affairs. In Green Pines, Diana was both a driving force for philanthropic initiatives and a role model for young women striving to create a name for themselves in a competitive world. Together, the Lewises had built an enviable life. Their home, an architect's masterpiece, sat on the edge of the Green Pines Lake, boasting large windows that bathed each room in sunlight, an extensive library and a collection of contemporary art curated by Diana. Yet the heart of their world was their two daughters. Emily, a precocious 6-year-old with a shy smile and a love for storytelling, and Charlotte, their 4-year-old who had faced adversity from the day she was born. Charlotte was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at infancy, requiring round-the-clock care and unwavering attention. She could only speak a handful of words and needed help with nearly every basic task. Though her life was marked by challenges, Charlotte's gentle spirit left a mark on everyone who met her. To support their unconventional family routines, the Lewises employed 2 devoted staff members who had, over the years, become like extended relatives. Mrs. Peterson, the seasoned housekeeper, brought calm efficiency and a motherly warmth. Maria, a young caregiver, was entrusted with Charlotte's specialized needs. Her gentle singing and storytelling were daily comforts for the little girl. The bonds of trust within the Lewis household were strong, at least in theory, with every member playing an essential role in sustaining the sense of stability and care. While outsiders gazed in admiration, the realities of maintaining such a life demanded cooperation, resilience, and sometimes, secrecy. Neighbors would often see the Lewises at community events, always poised, always together. Their Christmas lights drew visitors in winter, and Diana's legal clinics were a summer staple. They seemed, by every external measure, the sort of family Green Pines was designed to nurture, loving, prosperous, and above all, safe from the world's caprice. Yet even within this portrait of success, storm clouds sometimes gathered. John's long hours, Diana's high-stress cases, the constant vigilance required for Charlotte's care. The family, for all their resources and outward harmony, was not immune to exhaustion, tension, and private moments of doubt. In truth, their carefully crafted existence teetered on a delicate balance, one that the coming storm would test more than any of them could have foreseen. 1. The fateful morning, March 22nd, 2010 dawned like any other Monday in Green Pines, with first light filtering softly through the tall pines and casting golden reflections off the community's tranquil lake. At the Lewis household, the day began in its usual well-orchestrated rhythm, the gentle clatter of breakfast preparations in the gourmet kitchen, the distant buzz of a robotic vacuum starting its rounds, and the muffled footsteps of staff moving quietly so as not to disturb the family's delicate peace. Maria, the family's dedicated caregiver, was already awake before sunrise. She tiptoed through the hallways, breathing in the scent of fresh coffee and citrus-scented polish, a signature of Mrs. Peterson's early morning cleaning routine. Maria prepared Emily and Charlotte's favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries and a dash of vanilla, hoping it would coax a smile from the girls, as it often did. The household began to rouse with gentle encouragement. John Lewis scanned headlines on his tablet at the breakfast nook, while Diana, quietly reviewing court notes, kept an eye on the clock from the dining table. The house, filled with modern comforts, seemed to run on invisible tracks with every detail cared for and accounted for. A few minutes before 8, Maria made her way upstairs to wake the girls. Light from the hallway crept through Emily's open door, and Maria was met with a sleepy giggle. Emily, as usual, snuggled under a fortress of stuffed animals. After rolling her eyes in mock exasperation and helping Emily prepare for school, Maria turned her attention to the adjacent room. Charlotte's sanctuary, filled with pastel hues, plush toys, and adaptive equipment that supported the little girl's daily routines. Maria quietly entered, half expecting the scene she had come to know by heart. Charlotte, often tangled in blankets, her soft breathing visible in the early morning light. But this morning, something was different. The bed was curiously still, the blankets suspiciously flat. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She approached quietly, calling Charlotte's name. There was no response. She shook the covers. Nothing. The small form that should have been there was gone. Panic didn't erupt all at once. It crept in first as a prickly unease, then as an icy rush. Maria checked the ensuite bathroom, the corners of the room, even under the bed, but Charlotte was nowhere to be found. Every logical explanation that flashed through Maria's mind was quickly snuffed out by one overbearing reality. Charlotte, with her limited mobility and inability to walk on her own, could not possibly have left the room unaided. Yet, she was gone. Maria's voice trembled as she called for Mrs. Peterson, her words tripping over themselves in Spanish and English. Within moments, Diana and John were summoned, disbelief etched across their faces. The household quickly descended into a frantic search, all order and routine shattered. They scoured the house methodically, closets, bathrooms, the laundry chute, the rarely used guest rooms. John darted outside, scanning the backyard and pool area as the sun continued to rise over Green Pines, indifferent to the chaos spilling across the estate. Emily, sensing something terribly wrong, clung to her mother's side, her breakfast forgotten, her wide eyes searching faces for reassurance. For nearly an hour, the search was desperate and fruitless. The security system logs were interrogated with trembling hands. Not a single entry or alarm. No sign of forced entry, no camera footage of anything amiss. The gates had been secure, the alarms set, yet, despite the security, precautions and routines, Charlotte had vanished into thin air. The panic inside the Lewis house echoed the unspoken terror of every parent, the realization that despite every effort, disaster can sneak past even the tallest walls and most careful plans. Within moments, a call was made to the police. The insular calm of Green Pines was about to be shattered, and the mystery of Charlotte's disappearance would grip not only her family, but soon, an entire nation. 1. The search begins. The initial shock of Charlotte's absence quickly gave way to frantic action as the reality set in. She couldn't have left her room, much less the house, without assistance. Maria, her hands trembling, retraced her steps and made sure every possible corner, closet, and underbed hiding spot was checked once, twice, and even a third time. Mrs. Peterson joined, methodically pulling back curtains, checking behind drapes, and glancing into hampers and storage chests, all with a meticulousness bred from years of professional care. The house, usually humming with routine and order, throbbed with rising anxiety, every tick of the clock intensifying their unease. John and Diana, roused by the growing commotion, split the search, John combing the backyard, pool enclosure, and even unlocking the garage and tool sheds, calling Charlotte's name into the empty spaces. Diana's voice echoed along marble-floored hallways as she checked bathrooms and guest suites, stopping to assure their elder daughter Emily, who clung to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with confusion and worry. Desperation settled into the cadence of every movement. Drawers yanked open, doors slammed, the faint hope that perhaps Charlotte was tucked into some improbable nook. When hope faded, urgency overtook. Maria and Peterson rushed from room to room with mounting panic, their disbelief now manifest in taut, harsh whispers. Diana phoned the security desk, demanding a review of the camera feeds going back to midnight. The guard on duty stammered nervous affirmations. John pored over the intricate smart home security logs, doors, motion sensors, alarms. All showed nothing abnormal. There had been no breach, no window left ajar, no sign of forced entry or exit, not even a disturbance on the garden beds beneath Charlotte's window. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Calls went out to trusted neighbors, whose children had sometimes visited for playdates in the slim hope Charlotte had wandered out, though everyone knew the idea was impossible. Meanwhile, outside, Green Pines' private security team fanned out across the manicured lawns and meandering walking paths, flashlights in hand despite the early hour, their radios buzzing with terse updates. Their certainty in the estate's inviolable security began to shake as search after search turned up nothing. By 8:55 a.m., the grim decision was made. Diana dialed 911, her voice breaking as she described the unimaginable. Her 4-year-old daughter, unable to walk or leave unaided, was missing from a supposedly impenetrable home. As she spoke, Maria wept quietly at the kitchen counter, Mrs. Peterson stood frozen in the foyer, and John gripped the edge of the dining table, as if bracing himself against the tide of panic threatening to engulf their world. The search had broadened. Now, it would become an ordeal for an entire neighborhood. 1. Baby Charlotte, the special child. Born prematurely, and weighing little more than a whispered hope, Charlotte Lewis came into the world with a fragile beauty and a fighting spirit that quietly awed everyone around her. From her earliest days in the neonatal intensive care unit, she faced challenges that would have overwhelmed many. Underdeveloped lungs, delicate muscles, and a diagnosis of cerebral palsy so severe that even doctors braced her parents for a life filled with uncertainty. But from the start, Charlotte refused to be defined by her limitations. At just 4 years old, Charlotte's daily reality was unlike that of her sister or the children who rode bicycles along the Green Pines lakes. Unable to walk or stand unaided and able to express herself only with a few simple words and gestures, she depended on the unwavering love and care of her family and caregivers. Yet those who got to know Charlotte discovered a girl whose world, though physically constrained, was rich with imagination, affection, and subtle flashes of humor that shone through her circumstances. Charlotte's room was sun-splashed and carefully arranged, decorated in gentle pastels, and full of tactile toys, soft animals, textured blocks, and sparkly mobiles that caught her gaze. Her favorite plush rabbit rarely left her side, and with its comforting presence, she would trace the patterns on her quilt by the window for long minutes. Her mind, as her mother Diana often said, sparkled behind her quiet eyes. Through moments of laughter, Charlotte would communicate not just with words but through expressive glances and a melodic hum that, for those who listened closely, became her distinctive conversation. Even with her medical needs, regular physical therapy, medications, stretches, and a complex feeding routine, Charlotte accepted each day's schedule with accepting bravery. Maria, the young caregiver, understood her best. She sang lullabies in both Spanish and English, read picture books in dramatic voices, and helped Charlotte thread beads on a string or feel the warmth of afternoon sun through her open window. The trust and bond between them were unmistakable. By evening, Charlotte's tiny hands would curl around Maria's fingers as they watched clouds change color, sometimes in peaceful silence, sometimes with Maria narrating the world outside, since Charlotte's limited range meant excursions past the home's walls were rare. 1. Police investigate, media erupts. The arrival of police at the Lewis residence marked an abrupt and irreversible end to the sleepy calm of Green Pines. What started as a desperate call from a terrified mother transformed instantly into a high-alert operation. Within 40 minutes of the 911 call, the front gates of Green Pines swung open, an exceedingly rare event, as the first squad cars rolled in, lights flashing, their presence shattering the quiet normalcy of the community. Police Chief William Ford, a seasoned veteran known equally for his stern demeanor and methodical thoroughness, took personal command of the scene. He arrived, trench coat barely askew, clipboard in hand, flanked by a fast mobilizing team of more than 50 officers. They established a command post on the Lewis driveway, radios crackling with continuous updates from field units, detectives, canine teams, and forensic technicians. The Lewis estate became the epicenter of a meticulously choreographed search. Officers fanned out through the sprawling home, methodically cataloging every room, closet, crawlspace, and nook. Each area was photographed, documented, and swept for clues. The first order of business was to secure the perimeter. Police set up physical barriers around the property, keeping both onlookers and would-be intruders at bay. Nothing, not even a leaf, would leave or enter without being noted in the rapidly growing logbook. Meanwhile, the estate's security system, once a symbol of invincibility, was subjected to intense scrutiny. Detectives worked side by side with private security to download and catalog every frame of surveillance footage from the last 48 hours. Every minute was analyzed, entry points, sensor records, gate logs. Ford's officers grilled the Green Pines guards with the intensity of a military tribunal. Could someone have bypassed the cameras? Was there a blind spot? Every hypothesis, no matter how remote, was considered. Within an hour, more resources arrived. 2 forensic vans set up a mobile lab at the curb. Police dogs, led by state-certified handlers, combed not just the house but the surrounding lawns, wooded paths, and the banks of the private lake. Their handlers moved with silent urgency, calling out short, firm commands as the dogs sniffed for any sign. A dropped toy, a scrap of clothing, the hint of Charlotte's scent. Helicopters arrived courtesy of the county, engines growling overhead, their searchlights sweeping over and over the estate and nearby greenbelts. Word traveled swiftly. Even before noon, reporters gathered at the main gates, their vans adorned with satellite dishes and station logos. Cameramen conducted shaky live shots while anchors recited what sparse facts they had. By midday, the Lewis case was trending regionally: missing child, wealthy family, exclusive neighborhood, no sign of forced entry. The tantalizing mystery was irresistible to news outlets and social media alike. Helicopters from rival stations orbited above, sometimes outnumbering the search choppers. Green Pines, unused to outside attention, became a fortress under siege, not just by search teams but by the relentless appetite of the press. Local journalists, national news, bloggers, and online sleuths all lined up along the fence, aiming cameras through gaps in the hedges, nagging guards for statements. Drones buzzed overhead, live-streaming footage to thousands glued to their screens. Neighbors, previously cloaked in the armor of privilege and privacy, found themselves fielding calls from reporters, or worse, having their names and addresses spread online as internet detectives combed public records for any scrap of gossip. Inside the estate, the pressure was unrelenting. The Lewises, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion, shuffled between detectives, their own security team, and a growing cloud of doubt. Officers interviewed each adult in the home repeatedly, documenting every word, every memory. No detail was too small. What pajamas did Charlotte wear? When was the last time she was seen? Had anything been out of the ordinary in recent days? Every inconsistency, every hesitation in their narratives was flagged for review. State police and FBI liaison officers soon arrived, bringing technical experts and behavioral analysts. They installed listening equipment, conducted background checks, and began mapping potential persons of interest, including household staff members, visitors, contractors, and neighbors. Every phone, hard drive, security badge, and car in the Lewis household was subject to analysis or subpoena. While the investigation advanced, the media onslaught reached fever pitch. Morning news programs hosted panels of experts speculating about everything from rare medical kidnappings to possible ransom plots. Hashtags proliferated, #Find Charlotte, #Green Pines Mystery, #Behind Closed Gates. Well-wishers and internet trolls alike descended on the family's social media pages with messages of support, outrage, suspicion, and wild theory. TV crews staked out the school Emily attended, tried to catch glimpses of John or Diana sneaking past the wall of cameras, and even harassed neighbors for stray remarks. Within Green Pines, the broader community grew increasingly anxious. Homeowners watched emergency vehicles pass and worried, not just for Charlotte but for the sanctity of their oasis. Some families offered to help, printing flyers or searching the surrounding woods. Others locked their homes tighter and refused to answer the phone, uncomfortable with any association to the now infamous address. Rumors, rare currency in Green Pines, spread faster than fact. Was someone targeting the wealthy? Was there a flaw in their supposed security? Polite greetings at the country club gave way to tense whispers and sidelong glances. As night fell, the search took on a somber tone illuminated by floodlights and the never-ending pulse of news crews filming from a respectful but hungry distance. Sleep was impossible. The estate, once a haven, had become a fishbowl. As hour after hour ticked by, it became increasingly clear. The case of Charlotte Lewis was no longer a family tragedy, nor even just a police matter. It was a national story, threading together privilege, vulnerability, fear, and 1,000 questions still without answers. When the investigation takes a turn. In the days following Charlotte's mysterious disappearance, the Lewis home, which had once stood as an island of security amidst Green Pines' manicured perfection, was transformed into an arena of suspicion and uncertainty. When initial searches throughout the estate and sprawling grounds yielded nothing, and sophisticated reviews of security logs and footage revealed not even the faintest hint of an intruder, the tenor of the investigation shifted sharply. The delicious certainty of the community's defenses was now thrown into doubt, not because someone had broken in, but because, perhaps, the answer was buried among those already inside. It started subtly. Detectives, no longer content with the mechanical cataloging of checklists and evidence markers, began to press harder in their interviews. The initial wave of questions to the family and staff had focused on timelines and routines. What time had Charlotte last been seen? What doors were locked? Who had keys? And who might have known the family's patterns? These interviews, at first conversational, grew more probing and precise. The officers questioned every inconsistency, however minor, in overlapping testimonies. Had Emily truly heard Charlotte hum at dawn? Was Mrs. Peterson really certain about the last diaper change? Why did Maria, usually so protective of her young charge, recall some details with uncertainty? Unbeknownst to the family, specialized teams began to install discreet surveillance devices around the house, hidden microphones tucked into bookshelves, recording devices nestled in lamp bases, even unobtrusive tracking devices on family vehicles. The justification was as pragmatic as it was chilling. If Charlotte had not been spirited away by some outside danger, the horror must have originated within the walls of their seemingly flawless home. Forensics experts returned to the Lewis house, this time with an even keener eye for domestic subtleties. Every day, evidence technicians revisited the scenes, dusting for latent prints in odd corners, using alternate light sources to scan bed sheets, clothing, and even plush toys for biological traces and fibers that might point to a struggle, an accident, or a hidden clue. Every item was photographed, cataloged, and cross-checked against timelines built from security metadata. An unwashed mug on the kitchen island or a single sock behind a bed was no longer mundane. Each became potential threads to a mystery that had eluded all logic. The outwardly harmonious Lewis family and their staff felt the pressure intensify with each passing hour. Where once there had been open consultation with detectives and expressions of hope for Charlotte's recovery, now the mood shifted toward tension and guardedness. John Lewis, usually composed and measured, became defensive and irritable under repeated questioning. Diana, whose legal training had armored her for tough negotiations in the courtroom, now struggled with the emotional burden of having her integrity, and that of everyone she loved, called into question. Maria found herself breaking down in tears, her nerves strained with fear that any misspoken sentence would cast her as a suspect rather than a friend. Even Mrs. Peterson, stoic and imperturbable after so many years of service, bristled with frustration during yet another long night of answering the same questions in subtly different ways. Detectives began to theorize, sometimes out loud, sometimes among themselves, that cracks existed in the family's careful choreography. They pored over psychological profiles assembled by behavioral experts and began to scrutinize family dynamics. Was there resentment over Charlotte's needs dividing the parents? Had Emily, feeling neglected, acted out in some unthinkable manner? Did Maria, burdened by the isolation and responsibility of caring for a disabled child, harbor darker emotions beneath her affection? Did Mrs. Peterson truly know everything that happened under her watchful eye? The Lewis estate's much-vaunted security apparatus, once the investigation's first wolf to chase, became instead a focus for suspicion. Did someone inside understand it well enough to disable an alarm or mask activity? Forensic specialists dissected every software log on the central server, looking for erased entries, backdoor logins, or even deleted video files. Cybercrime units scanned computer hard drives and phones for evidence of recent searches, encrypted messages, or the presence of hidden social media accounts. Any indication that someone was planning an escape, hiding communications, or seeking advice in dark web forums. Outside the mansion, the climate of suspicion radiated outward. Neighbors who had once peered over hedges, eager for news, now eyed each other warily, conscious that the perpetrator, if there was one, could easily be hiding behind a perfect lawn or signature smile. Rumors churned beneath the smooth surface of Green Pines. Some whispered that police were sniffing out a ransom plot. Others speculated darkly about marital trouble, or guessed that Charlotte's medical condition was at the root of some tragic act of desperation. Each new round of police interviews, each unmarked car parked on a quiet side street, ignited new stories. Within the house, the isolation was profound. Police implemented restrictions on visitor access. Phone calls were logged and, when possible, quietly listened to. Staff and residents alike became hyper-aware of their words, their silences, their every gesture. At first they had drawn together in the face of crisis. Now the seeds of mistrust, planted by relentless interrogation and the growing realization that suspicion had shifted inward, began to sprout. Unspoken accusations passed in glances at the breakfast table. Privacy, once a right, was now a casualty of the investigation. As the days wore on, each family member and employee became subject not only to the law's scrutiny but to self-doubt and paranoia. Maria replayed everything she had done that morning in her mind, over and over, unable to sleep. Mrs. Peterson watched the detectives for slips in their questions, desperate to maintain her dignity. Emily, too young to fully understand, sensed the tenseness in every adult voice. Diana and John found themselves confronting not only detectives but each other, as their mutual trust faltered under the weight of external suspicion. Night brought no reprieve. Late into the quiet hours, police would confer softly in the living room, sketching out family movements, combing through interview transcripts, searching for the one thread that would make sense of Charlotte's vanishing. Green Pines, with all its luxury and illusion of order, now seemed more vulnerable than any of its residents had ever believed possible. And for the Lewises, paradise had truly become a gilded cage, as they waited in dread for the day, soon, perhaps, when suspicion would tip over into accusation, and family secrets, if they existed, would finally come to light. 1. The investigation takes a turn. In the days following Charlotte's mysterious disappearance, the Lewis home, which had once stood as an island of security amidst Green Pines' manicured perfection, was transformed into an arena of suspicion and uncertainty. When initial searches throughout the estate and sprawling grounds yielded nothing, and sophisticated reviews of security logs and footage revealed not even the faintest hint of an intruder, the tenor of the investigation shifted sharply. The delicious certainty of the community's defenses was now thrown into doubt, not because someone had broken in, but because perhaps the answer was buried among those already inside. It started subtly. Detectives, no longer content with the mechanical cataloging of checklists and evidence markers, began to press harder in their interviews. The initial wave of questions to the family and staff had focused on timelines and routines. What time had Charlotte last been seen? What doors were locked? Who had keys? And who might have known the family's patterns? These interviews, at first conversational, grew more probing and precise. The officers questioned every inconsistency, however minor, in overlapping testimonies. Had Emily truly heard Charlotte hum at dawn? Was Mrs. Peterson really certain about the last diaper change? Why did Maria, usually so protective of her young charge, recall some details with uncertainty? Unbeknownst to the family, specialized teams began to install discreet surveillance devices around the house, hidden microphones tucked into bookshelves, recording devices nestled in lamp bases, even unobtrusive tracking devices on family vehicles. The justification was as pragmatic as it was chilling. If Charlotte had not been spirited away by some outside danger, the horror must have originated within the walls of their seemingly flawless home. Forensics experts returned to the Lewis house, this time with an even keener eye for domestic subtleties. Every day, evidence technicians revisited the scenes, dusting for latent prints in odd corners, using alternate light sources to scan bedsheets, clothing, and even plush toys for biological traces and fibers that might point to a struggle, an accident, or a hidden clue. Every item was photographed, cataloged, and cross-checked against timelines built from security metadata. An unwashed mug on the kitchen island or a single sock behind a bed was no longer mundane. Each became potential threads to a mystery that had eluded all logic. The outwardly harmonious Lewis family and their staff felt the pressure intensify with each passing hour. Where once there had been open consultation with detectives and expressions of hope for Charlotte's recovery, now the mood shifted toward tension and guardedness. John Lewis, usually composed and measured, became defensive and irritable under repeated questioning. Diana, whose legal training had armored her for tough negotiations in the courtroom, now struggled with the emotional burden of having her integrity, and that of everyone she loved, called into question. Maria found herself breaking down in tears, her nerves strained with fear that any misspoken sentence would cast her as a suspect rather than a friend. Even Mrs. Peterson, stoic and imperturbable after so many years of service, bristled with frustration during yet another long night of answering the same questions in subtly different ways. Detectives began to theorize, sometimes out loud, sometimes among themselves, that cracks existed in the family's careful choreography. They pored over psychological profiles assembled by behavioral experts and began to scrutinize family dynamics. Was there resentment over Charlotte's needs dividing the parents? Had Emily, feeling neglected, acted out in some unthinkable manner? Did Maria, burdened by the isolation and responsibility of caring for a disabled child, harbor darker emotions beneath her affection? Did Mrs. Peterson truly know everything that happened under her watchful eye? The Lewis estate's much-vaunted security apparatus, once the investigation's first wolf to chase, became instead a focus for suspicion. Did someone inside understand it well enough to disable an alarm or mask activity? Forensic specialists dissected every software log on the central server, looking for erased entries, backdoor logins, or even deleted video files. Cybercrime units scanned computer hard drives and phones for evidence of recent searches, encrypted messages, or the presence of hidden social media accounts. Any indication that someone was planning an escape, hiding communications, or seeking advice in dark web forums. Outside the mansion, the climate of suspicion radiated outward. Neighbors who had once peered over hedges, eager for news, now eyed each other warily, conscious that the perpetrator, if there was one, could easily be hiding behind a perfect lawn or signature smile. Rumors churned beneath the smooth surface of Green Pines. Some whispered that police were sniffing out a ransom plot. Others speculated darkly about marital trouble or guessed that Charlotte's medical condition was at the root of some tragic act of desperation. Each new round of police interviews, each unmarked car parked on a quiet side street, ignited new stories. Within the house, the isolation was profound. Police implemented restrictions on visitor access, phone calls were logged and, when possible, quietly listened to. Staff and residents alike became hyper-aware of their words, their silences, their every gesture. At first, they had drawn together in the face of crisis. Now the seeds of mistrust, planted by relentless interrogation and the growing realization that suspicion had shifted inward, began to sprout. Unspoken accusations passed in glances at the breakfast table. Privacy, once a right, was now a casualty of the investigation. As the days wore on, each family member and employee became subject not only to the law's scrutiny, but to self-doubt and paranoia. Maria replayed everything she had done that morning in her mind over and over, unable to sleep. Mrs. Peterson watched the detectives for slips in their questions, desperate to maintain her dignity. Emily, too young to fully understand, sensed the tenseness in every adult voice. Diana and John found themselves confronting not only detectives, but each other, as their mutual trust faltered under the weight of external suspicion. Night brought no reprieve. Late into the quiet hours, police would confer softly in the living room, sketching out family movements, combing through interview transcripts, searching for the one thread that would make sense of Charlotte's vanishing. Green Pines, with all its luxury and illusion of order, now seemed more vulnerable than any of its residents had ever believed possible, and for the Lewises, paradise had truly become a gilded cage as they waited in dread for the day, soon perhaps, when suspicion would tip over into accusation, and family secrets, if they existed, would finally come to light. 2. The family becomes suspects. March 30th dawned gray and heavy over Green Pines, an atmosphere reflecting the changing tides within the Lewis household. If in the beginning sorrow and confusion had overshadowed everything, now the whisper of suspicion grew louder with each passing hour. Following mounting pressure from public scrutiny, relentless media coverage, and a lack of leads pointing to an outside perpetrator, the police took the drastic and to some unthinkable step. John Lewis, Diana, Mrs. Peterson, and Maria were each taken separately into custody for individual interrogation. Officers arrived quietly at dawn, escorting the adults away in unmarked cars amidst silent, watching neighbors and half-hidden reporters. For the first time, the family's distress was not simply private, it was on display for all of Green Pines to see. At the precinct, each interrogation unfolded in a different room, each subject acutely aware they were not only suspects, but possibly each other's accusers. For years, unity had been their shield. Now, that bond was forcibly tested by hours of questioning under harsh fluorescent lights, voices growing raw and hoarse as the same timelines, actions, and conversations were dissected from every angle. Detectives took different approaches, some gentle and coaxing, others blunt and aggressive, all pressing for inconsistencies and searching for the secret that might unlock the case. What had really happened the morning Charlotte disappeared? Where had each adult been? Who had reason, opportunity, or perhaps a history of frustration that could have led to tragedy? John, always confident and careful, found his composure shaken as a veteran detective pored over his business records, financial statements, even private emails, probing for debts, affairs, or secret plans that could hint at motive. Diana, usually sharp-witted and steadfast in the face of adversity, now felt her legal acumen turn against her. Detectives played recordings of her phone calls, read transcripts of her texts, and suggested she might be using her expertise to cover up a crime. Maria, emotionally drained, was caught between fear and bewilderment, trembling as she tried to explain every minute of her morning routine, her memories refracted by stress and guilt she did not feel but could not disprove. Mrs. Peterson, stoic but wounded by implication, answered each question in terse, measured phrases, holding her head high even as she internally replayed every decision she had made over years in the Lewis household. Meanwhile, back at Green Pines, news of the detention spread like wildfire. Neighbors watched television updates from behind blinds. Rumors multiplied at the community club, at the school gate, along jogging trails. Some pitied the Lewises, others judged harshly. Was there something rotten beneath their perfect surface all along? Did wealth and privacy hide unspeakable secrets? The neighborhood, once united in concern, was now fragmenting into camps of doubt, speculation, and open mistrust. Inside the precinct, the interrogations revealed as much about the cracks in human memory as the cracks in relationships. Under pressure, timelines blurred. John contradicted an earlier statement about coming home late. Diana realized she had not actually checked on Charlotte herself that night, but assumed Maria had. Maria's recollection of a lullaby sung at dawn was vague. The song, the time, and even Charlotte's cuddly animals seemed to float in and out of focus under duress. Mrs. Peterson could not say with certainty whether she had heard the girls' voices, or simply imagined them as part of her daily pattern. Detectives cataloged each inconsistency as if they were puzzle pieces. To outsiders, it seemed the perfect family now collapsed under the weight of suspicion, each member's weakness exposed. The publicly released information sparked a media frenzy. Overnight, the story transformed from one of tragedy and loss to a national whodunit. Commentators on cable news mused about the coldness in John's TV appearance, the robotic calm of Diana's public statement, the unusual loyalty of their immigrant household staff. Online, amateur sleuths created forums dissecting everything, from Diana's hairstyle to Maria's accent. In a matter of days, public opinion splintered. Some demanded justice for Charlotte, convinced there must be a monster hiding among the adults. Others called for empathy, decrying a system that hounded grieving parents. The days of detention tested everyone to their limits. John grew withdrawn and angry, lashing out at the implication he could harm his own child. Diana, stripped of control, oscillated between numb cooperation and indignant defiance. Maria, terrified of deportation and haunted by the possibility she would never escape suspicion, wept herself to sleep each night. Mrs. Peterson, the oldest and in many ways the most vulnerable, crumbled in the face of accusations. The family she had served for decades no longer felt safe. Despite the pressure, none of the evidence gathered was conclusive. The forensics team still could not place any of the adults at the scene of a crime. No physical evidence pointed to an act of malice or calculated harm. Still, every moment of uncertainty, every answer that failed to align precisely with another, added to a mounting sense of collective guilt. The Lewis's world shrank to interrogation rooms and tabloids, their legacy teetering on the edge. Trust, the most essential currency among them, eroded with every hour spent under suspicion. Outside, the walls of Green Pines seemed less secure than ever. Other families once close to the Lewises quietly distanced themselves, instructing their children not to mention Charlotte or visit the estate. Whisper campaigns uncovered evidence ranging from minor arguments at past dinner parties, to John's aggressive real estate deals, to Diana's high-profile controversial lawsuits. The village, built on the premise of exclusivity, now became a hotbed for gossip and tension. Every household wondered, if it could happen to the Lewises, could it happen to anyone? A midnight revelation. In the deep hours of March 31st, while a thunderstorm rolled across the Texas horizon and Green Pines lay shrouded in anxious silence, a small caravan of forensic experts returned to the Lewis residence. The mansion, now ghostly in its stillness, had already been scoured multiple times by both police and outside investigators. Yet a cloud of unease persisted. There was a restlessness in the air, as if the house itself was holding back one last, shattering secret. The forensic team's entry was purposeful but subdued. They moved through the corridors with the cautious reverence reserved for sacred ground, boots muffled by luxury carpets, gloved hands sensitive to the weight of every drawer and creak of every mahogany panel. This wasn't just another sweep, it was an act of desperation. With the Lewises under suspicion and community trust unraveling, the officials knew that nothing short of a breakthrough would halt the rising tide of outrage. An hour into the renewed search, a faint odor caught the attention of Dr. Olivia Cahill, the lead forensic pathologist. The smell, sickly sweet and out of place amid the lemon antiseptic aroma that clung to the house, seeped through the otherwise sterile calm of Charlotte's bedroom. The team paused, senses sharpening. They had checked this room before, not once but several times. But in the stillness of night, with the pressure on and adrenaline high, what had been missed now stood out. Dr. Cahill directed the technicians with brisk precision. They began a systematic inch-by-inch inspection, shifting items, pressing along baseboards, and peering into every shadow-clad space. The crib, so unnervingly empty, was re-examined. Toys and bedding were bagged, catalogued, and gently removed. It was then, as one technician kneeled at the edge of the small bed, nearly hidden by its elaborate frame and thick linens, that a sour wave of odor struck anew. Hesitantly they lifted the quilt and pulled back the soft pastel sheets. The box spring shifted under their careful probing, its weight dragging against the well-worn floor. There, wedged in the narrow gap between mattress and headboard, they found what no one in their worst nightmares wanted to imagine. The tiny figure of Charlotte, still in her blue pajamas, had been concealed all along, overlooked amid the panic and blind spots born of both familiarity and disbelief. The moment was frozen. The room seemed to contract as the investigators stared in stunned silence, the air heavy with the finality of their discovery. Their radios crackled, voices tense and controlled, as protocol dictated an immediate perimeter lockdown. The search that had gripped a nation and shattered a family ended not with a confession, nor with a missing person report, but in the suffocating confines of the very place that had always meant safety, her own bed. Word spread through the house quickly, yet time slowed to a crawl. Senior officers moved with grim determination, documenting the scene with a thoroughness bordering on reverence. They measured the gap between mattress and bed frame, photographed every angle, and catalogued fibers, prints, and any trace evidence, their movements driven by a growing sense of disbelief. For all the sophisticated technology, expert interviews, and aggressive tactics, the answer had hidden in plain sight, eluding even the most thorough searches. Outside, the Lewis household was awakened to frantic knocking and urgent footsteps. Diana, now living with nerves stretched to breaking, understood instantly. Something had shifted. John, his face gray with exhaustion and dread, demanded to see his daughter, but was firmly held off by officers citing procedure. Maria, devastated, began to sob before the news was even spoken. Mrs. Peterson, usually so steady, collapsed onto the kitchen bench, hands shaking uncontrollably. The silence in the foyer was thicker than any accusation, a grief too enormous now to be spoken. As dawn broke, the official announcement was made. Charlotte Lewis had been found, her death not the result of an abduction or malicious act, but what appeared, at first glance, to be a horrifying, tragic accident. The forensic team refrained from comment, but the facts spoke for themselves. In the panic of that first morning, amid routine, chaos, and perhaps the blinding hope that she was truly missing, no one had found her, though she was there all along, hidden by the very fabric that was supposed to comfort her. The discovery ripped through Green Pines like a second shockwave. Reporters swarmed the gates, broadcasting the news with a frenzy that bordered on the ghoulish. Parents clutched their own children tighter, others blamed the police. Some questioned whether silence, fear, or shame had allowed such a dreadful possibility to remain concealed. The community, so certain of its control over fate, was now forced to reckon with the terrible truth that even in the safest, most watchful places, catastrophe can fester. Within the Lewis family, the revelation shattered whatever fragile trust remained. Diana's face, once composed, now gaunt and haunted, betrayed the wounds etched deep by suspicion and grief. John retreated into himself, racked by silent guilt and unspeakable regret. Maria and Mrs. Peterson, once pillars of routine, felt the world they helped maintain collapse into dust. There would be no relief from the questions, only the worsening realization that defenses had failed in the only way that truly mattered. The night of March 31st, meant to offer closure, became instead a beginning of mourning, of controversy, of the endlessly echoing question, how? How could Charlotte have lain, unnoticed, so close for so long? And what did that say about the nature of attention, love, and the limitations of even the most vigilant hearts? The forensic conclusion, and a shocking truth. The morning after Charlotte's body was finally discovered in her own bedroom, the Lewis estate was eerily quiet, stripped of its usual rhythms and pretense of security. Authorities wasted no time securing the scene. Then, under nervous watch, the forensic team began its painstaking examination. Their assignment was now twofold: to uncover not only the immediate cause of Charlotte's tragic end, but also the chain of oversights, misjudgments, and circumstances that had led an entire community and a nation astray. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Olivia Cahill, a veteran of countless complex cases, led the post-mortem. She approached the task with a meticulousness born not only of professional responsibility, but also of an acute awareness that every detail would be scrutinized by the world. Charlotte's small frame was photographed, measured, and inspected for any sign of injury, maltreatment, or interference. A flurry of specialists cataloged fibers, biological evidence, and the physical context. The gap between mattress and headboard, the layout of the bedding, the position and condition of the pajama fabric. In a sealed laboratory downtown, the clinical work unfolded. Toxicology screens, tissue sampling, and microscopic examination. All steps followed with double and triple checks. They viewed the contorted position of Charlotte's body, how her head, shoulder, and neck had become wedged between mattress and ornate wooden support, how the soft sheets had been pushed aside in a desperate, silent struggle. There were signs of oxygen deprivation and acute distress, but notably and heartbreakingly, no external wounds to suggest foul play or even a rapid, violent accident. Within 24 hours, Dr. Cahill issued her preliminary report. Charlotte Lewis had died of accidental asphyxiation, likely within minutes of becoming trapped in that narrow, hidden void. Most difficult for all involved, forensic evidence suggested her death had occurred very early on the morning she disappeared, probably just hours before her absence was discovered. There were no indications that she had ever left the room, nor that another person had intentionally caused her harm. Every scientific data point pointed back to the same bitter reality. Charlotte's demise was the result of a tragic domestic accident, and the subsequent failures of frantic, grief-shaken eyes to find her where she truly was. The secondary question, how Charlotte's body could have lain undiscovered through repeated searches, was equally haunting. Dr. Cahill's team reconstructed the scene over and over, theorizing about panic, darkness, and the tricks that terror and shock play on human perception. An official analysis cited the complexity of the custom mahogany bed, the way the box spring masked the gap, and how, in the chaos, hope and disbelief might have conspired to make the obvious invisible. The conclusion was both mundane and devastating. Sometimes the most extraordinary disasters require only a brief lapse, a threat of bad luck, and a heartbreakingly ordinary blind spot. Although the report was clinically objective, it was impossible to ignore the implied rebuke of everyone involved, from the staff who had made the bed without noticing a hidden weight, to the family who slept in sorrow in the next room, to the officers and search teams who believed too completely in security and routine. The truth was not one of malice or conspiracy, but of human fallibility in its cruelest form. Once presented to the authorities, and released through a carefully worded statement to the public, the findings sent new shockwaves through Green Pines and beyond. National headlines fixated less on the details of forensic science than on the devastating message. No level of wealth, vigilance, or technological sophistication could guarantee safety inside the home. On television, forensic experts explained the chain of events, a series of small oversights multiplied by panic, birthing a tragedy too painful to fully accept. The Lewis family, now publicly exonerated of wrongdoing but battered beyond recognition, shrank under the weight of the report. The police, blamed for tunnel vision and procedural gaps, launched an internal inquiry into the nature and conduct of the search. Even Green Pines, once a byword for luxury and control, felt the blow as families re-examined the limits of their own assurance and the cost of believing in absolute security. The medical examiner's official conclusion would remain a matter of public record: accidental death, no evidence of homicide or neglect, and no suspect beyond chance itself. Unofficially, however, the scars of doubt, guilt, and unanswered questions would persist in every corner of Charlotte's home, and, in the public imagination, perhaps forever. Waves of doubt and outrage. In the aftermath of the shocking forensic revelation, a conclusion labeling Charlotte Lewis's death as a tragic accident, the ripple of disbelief and suspicion in Green Pines did not simply fade away. Instead, it erupted into a sustained wave of public outrage and skepticism that engulfed the community, the investigating authorities, and, most searingly, the Lewis family itself. The veneer of closure provided by the medical examiner was fragile at best. For many it felt more like a bandage hastily applied to a gaping wound rather than a true resolution. Whispers swept through social circles, echoing in both lavish parlors and cramped service quarters. How could so many professionals, aided by state-of-the-art technology, fail to find a small, immobile child in her own bed? Murmurs grew into pointed accusations. Theories multiplied at country club brunches, in wordless glances exchanged at the school's drop-off circle, and in the relentless churn of online message boards. For all the exhaustive evidence, an unsettling sense of incompleteness lingered. On cable news panels, national commentators picked apart the medical report's wording. Some insisted law enforcement was complicit in a cover-up engineered by the wealthy. Others speculated the family had staged an elaborate deception, whether born of shame, fear, or something darker was left unsaid but heavily implied. Conspiracy theorists seized upon the gaps. Was Charlotte's disability exaggerated for sympathy? Did John or Diana somehow orchestrate the tragedy, intentionally or through neglect? Every media appearance by the Lewises or their lawyer was dissected for micro-expressions and veiled admissions. Out-of-context photographs fueled dozens of viral threads as armchair detectives unearthed supposed connections between the Lewis family and city officials, private investigators, or the estate's security firm. Even the forensics team came under fire. Had crucial evidence been overlooked or intentionally ignored to protect influential residents and preserve the community's pristine image? Most agonizing was the burden carried by the Lewis family and their inner circle. Neighbors once sympathetic now kept a wary distance. Mrs. Peterson could no longer shop in town without enduring hostile stares or overhearing strangers' cruel conjectures. Maria, the family's caregiver, felt ostracized by both longtime friends and other immigrants, many of whom believed the case would never have resolved so quietly had she been just a regular staffer. John's business partners began distancing themselves. Diana's law firm faced anonymous threats and pressure to remove her from public initiatives. The once welcoming gates of Green Pines now felt like the bars of a gilded prison. The police, too, found themselves in the crosshairs. Online petitions circulated demanding a new investigation, an independent review, or wholesale reform of police procedure in wealthy enclaves. Journalists submitted endless public records requests, forcing the release of internal emails riddled with frustration and confusion. The chief of police faced heated town hall interrogations, forced from quiet confidence to public defensiveness. Some officers admitted to privately second-guessing every step, doubting whether routine, bias, or the immense pressure to deliver closure had led them astray. The media's appetite for updates ensured the storm would rage on, far past the tragedy's official end. Social media became a battleground for rage and conjecture. Hashtags such as #Justice for Charlotte and #GreenPines cover-up trended regularly, not only drawing in locals but also igniting a nationwide audience that saw in the tragedy their own anxieties about privilege, justice, and trust in institutions. Newscasters replayed family surveillance footage, zooming in and speculating on every blurred shadow. National talk shows invited experts and supposed insiders who opined on family dynamics, community secrets, and the failures of modern policing. Some online commentators even went so far as to suggest supernatural explanations, as if reality itself was too inadequate to justify the chain of improbable oversights. For Green Pines, the aftershocks were profound. Long-standing friendships quietly dissolved under the weight of suspicion. Whisper campaigns undermined both established families and newcomers. The HOA released statements urging respect, unity, and healing, but their words rang hollow in the face of mounting paranoia. Some residents discreetly installed new layers of security, others quietly put their homes on the market, fearful of both negative publicity and the revealed fragility of their treasured oasis. The children of Green Pines, Charlotte's classmates, Emily's playmates, were not immune. Rumors flourished at the private academy, some children repeating harrowing stories overheard at home, others suddenly forbidden from attending birthday parties or playdates. Parents, unsure how to address the torrent of anxiety and misinformation, either downplayed the tragedy or, in some cases, fanned its flames. Professional counselors were brought in, but even therapy sessions often degenerated into uneasy silences, or worse, mutual accusations disguised as concern for community safety. Amid this tempest, grief remained the only constant. John and Diana, already shattered by loss and suspicion, became virtual prisoners in their own home. Their sorrow was compounded by the knowledge that, for many neighbors, their innocence would forever remain in question. For the staff, guilt fused with anger, a sense of having been both victims and scapegoats. Even now, months after Charlotte's death, the flowers left on the Lewis porch seemed less a gesture of solidarity than a mute testimony to all that had been lost: certainty, friendship, security, and above all, trust. In time, the national spotlight shifted, but its damage was done. Green Pine's tale faded from headlines, yet the scars endured in altered routines, broken relationships, and a lingering apprehension. The tragedy of Charlotte Lewis had begun as an unimaginable accident within a fortress of privilege. It ended for many as an inescapable lesson in the limits of control and the corrosive power of doubt. The case closes, but answers remain elusive. In the months and years that followed the official closure of the Lewis case, Green Pines attempted, unsuccessfully, to stitch back the tattered fabric of its sense of security. The authorities' declaration that Charlotte's death was the result of a heartbreaking accident did nothing to hush the ever-present whirlpool of speculation and rumor. Newspapers published retrospectives, talk shows hosted heated debates, and community listservs remained abuzz with speculation, even as formal proceedings faded into bureaucratic archives. For many, the so-called conclusion felt less like closure and more like a door quietly shut on a room still echoing with unanswered questions. Diana Lewis, once the community's star attorney and a paragon of grace under pressure, became the first to leave. The weight of suspicion, the loss of Charlotte, and the relentless whispers simply became too much to bear. She moved out of Green Pines in the dead of night, her departure noted only by the fading silhouette of a moving van and the flickering porch light of her now desolate mansion. John, for all his initial resolve, found himself increasingly isolated. Colleagues grew cold, deals slipped away, and even old friends greeted him with a subtle wariness that never existed before. Ultimately, a judge, citing the best interests of the child, revoked his custody of Emily, who was quietly sent to live with Diana in a city far removed from the shadow of Green Pines. Within the estate itself, the Lewis home became a grim monument. Overgrown hedges wound around rusting gates, and the pool, once sparkling, stood drained and silent, reflecting only the wide, unforgiving Texas sky. Tourists sometimes slowed their cars as they passed, pointing to the house with a mix of morbid curiosity and sadness, as if hoping for a fleeting glimpse of an answer that had eluded police, relatives, and neighbors alike. The property lingered on the market for years, price dropping steadily as the tale of Charlotte's fate merged with urban legend status. Haunted, some said. Cursed. Others insisted more practically that a horrible thing had happened, and no family would feel easy within those walls again. Even after Charlotte's body was reburied in a quiet cemetery several years later, the public continued to debate every aspect of the tragedy. Crime forums reopened archival threads with each new anniversary. National magazines penned think pieces about the fallibility of privilege, the limits of forensic certainty, and the quietly devastating impact of communal distrust. In academic circles and police conferences, experts weighed the case as a cautionary tale, evidence that no system, no matter how elite, was immune to the twin perils of human error and snap judgment. The question on everyone's lips was never simply what happened to Charlotte, but rather, could it happen again, anywhere? But the most enduring legacy was not found in headlines or scholarly debates. It was in the subtle shifts within Green Pines and communities like it. Families re-examined their trust in alarm systems and private patrols. Neighbors, having once prided themselves on their close-knit camaraderie, now eyed each other with wary caution. Some intimate friendships quietly dissolved under the pressure of suspicion, and even years later at garden parties and school fundraisers, a certain deeply ingrained reticence persisted, resting in lowered voices and diverted eyes. The comfort that Green Pines once promised was irrevocably fractured, and its residents were left to reckon with a sobering truth. Some questions were destined never to be answered, at least not to anyone's satisfaction. Ironically, it was the unresolved nature of Charlotte's case that left the most profound mark. Closure remained illusionary. The silence following the last press release stretched, heavy and uneasy, across lawns and into lives. Each retelling took on fresh layers, new implications, always circling back to the same uneasy place. For the Lewises, for Green Pines, and for a nation strangely riveted by a little girl's tragic fate behind the gates of privilege, the story had no final period, only an ellipsis, forever hanging at the edge of certainty.